"No one will believe this," she said finally. "No one will believe that you did this to us." Maya's expression didn't change. "Then I suggest you don't tell anyone. Because if you do, you'll have to explain why you were here after hours with scissors, why you were threatening another student, why you thought it was acceptable to try to cut someone with a weapon." Sophie's face was pale as she realized the implications. "We were recording," she said weakly. "We have evidence." "Evidence of what?" Maya asked. "Evidence that you cornered me with scissors and tried to stab me. Evidence that I defended myself. When you attacked me with a weapon. Please, by all means, share that evidence. I'm sure the administration would be very interested in seeing it." The three girls looked at each other, understanding dawning in their eyes. They had created a situation where they were clearly the aggressors, where they had brought weapons and threatened violence. Any evidence they had would only incriminate them further. Emma was the first to move toward the door, her injured wrist making her movements awkward. "This isn't over," she said again, but the words carried no weight. Maya's voice stopped her before she could leave. "Emma," she said quietly, "if you ever come near me with scissors again, or any other weapon, I won't be as gentle as I was today. Do you understand me?" Emma nodded, her face pale with pain and humiliation. She understood perfectly. Victoria and Sophie followed Emma toward the door, their usual confident stride replaced by uncertain shuffling. At the doorway, Victoria turned back one last time. "What are you really?" she asked, her voice carrying genuine curiosity beneath the fear. Maya met her gaze steadily. "I'm someone who tried to be invisible. Someone who wanted to finish high school without hurting anyone. But I'm also someone who knows how to fight when fighting becomes necessary." After they left, Maya spent several minutes cleaning up the art studio, setting the easels back in their proper places, and organizing the supplies that had been scattered during the confrontation. Her movements were calm and methodical, showing no signs of the violence that had just occurred. She picked up her self-portrait from where it had fallen during the struggle, examining it for damage. The drawing was intact, though one corner was slightly wrinkled. As she looked at her own face captured in charcoal, she realized that something fundamental had changed. The girl in the portrait still looked quiet and unassuming, but there was something different in the eyes now, something that suggested hidden depths and dangerous capabilities. Maya finished her work by the light of the setting sun, adding final details to the portrait, while the events of the afternoon played through her mind. She had revealed herself, shown her true nature to the three people who had tormented her. For weeks, there would be consequences, she knew, but they would be different kinds of consequences than the ones she had been enduring. Word of the confrontation spread through Westfield Academy like wildfire over the following days, but the details were confused and contradictory. The official story, as far as anyone could determine, was that there had been some kind of accident in the art studio involving overturned easels and scattered supplies. Emma Rodriguez appeared in classes with her wrist in a brace, claiming she had injured it during lacrosse practice. Sophie Chen was noticeably quieter than usual, her social media posts becoming less frequent and less focused on documenting other students' lives. Victoria Sterling maintained her position at the top of the social hierarchy, but her behavior toward Maya changed completely. She no longer sought confrontations, no longer orchestrated harassment campaigns, no longer treated Maya as an acceptable target. When they passed in the hallways, Victoria would look away quickly, as if afraid to meet Maya's eyes. Maya returned to her routine in the art studio, but she was no longer invisible. Other students nodded to her in the hallways, included her in conversations, treated her with a respect that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition. She had proven herself capable of standing up to the school's most powerful bully, and that proof had earned her a place in the social ecosystem that couldn't be taken away. Mrs. Patterson noticed the change immediately. Maya's work regained its precision and confidence, her technique showing the full extent of her considerable talent. When the teacher asked about the improvement, Maya simply smiled and said that she had found her focus again. The scissors incident became part of Maya's legend at Westfield Academy, though the true details were known only to the 4 people who had been in the art studio that day. Maya had learned that sometimes, despite your best efforts to avoid conflict, you have to stand up and fight. And when that moment comes, you better be ready. Her grandmother's training had prepared her for violence, but it had also taught her something more valuable: the knowledge that true strength comes from knowing when to fight and when to walk away. Maya had walked away for as long as possible. But when Victoria Sterling and her crew had cornered her with scissors, walking away was no longer an option. The quiet girl from the art studio had revealed herself to be something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined, and Westfield Academy would never be the same. Maya Chen had found her strength, and she would never be invisible again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. A simple pressure point strike to Sophie's wrist made her drop the phone, and a gentle push sent her stumbling into the supply cabinet. The impact wasn't hard enough to cause serious injury, but it was firm enough to make it clear that Maya could have done much worse. Emma was recovering, her face flushed with rage and embarrassment. She lunged for the scissors, but Maya was faster, her foot sweeping the cutting tools away from Emma's reaching fingers. When Emma tried to tackle her, Maya sidestepped and used the larger girl's momentum to send her crashing into a row of easels. The wooden frames clattered to the floor, and Emma found herself tangled in a mess of canvas and paint-stained wood. Victoria was backing toward the door, her composed facade cracking for the first time. "What are you?" she whispered, her voice carrying a note of genuine fear. "What kind of person moves like that?" Maya straightened, her breathing controlled. Despite the adrenaline coursing through her system, her grandmother's training had kicked in automatically. Years of careful instruction manifesting in movements that were both beautiful and deadly. "I'm someone who wanted to be left alone," she said, her voice calm and steady. "I'm someone who tried to avoid exactly this situation." Sophie was pressed against the supply cabinet, her phone forgotten on the floor. "You're insane," she said, her voice shaking. "You attacked us. We'll report you. We'll tell everyone you're dangerous." Maya looked at each of them in turn, her expression unreadable. "Report me for what?" "For defending myself when you cornered me with scissors. For protecting myself when you tried to stab me in the throat." She gestured toward Sophie's phone. "I hope you got good footage, because it's going to show exactly who the aggressor was." Emma struggled to her feet, her face a mask of pain and humiliation. Blood trickled from a small cut on her forehead where she had hit the easel, and her wrist was already beginning to swell where Maya had applied pressure to break her grip on the scissors. "This isn't over," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Maya picked up the scissors from the floor, examining them with professional interest. Her grandmother had taught her to appreciate quality craftsmanship, whether in weapons or tools, and these were indeed well made. "Actually, it is over," she said quietly, "because now you know what I'm capable of. And you know that I was holding back before, trying to avoid hurting anyone." Victoria's face was pale beneath her perfect makeup. "You could have done this the whole time," she said, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You could have fought back from the beginning, but you chose not to." Maya nodded. "I chose restraint. I chose to endure your harassment rather than escalate to violence. But when you cornered me with weapons, when you tried to cut me with scissors, that choice was taken away from me." She set the scissors down carefully on the supply table, her movements precise and controlled. "My grandmother taught me that the strongest person in any room is the one who doesn't need to prove it. But she also taught me that when someone tries to hurt you with a weapon, you have the right to defend yourself with whatever force is necessary." Emma looked at her swollen wrist, then at Maya, then back at her wrist. Who taught you to fight? Like that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Maya's expression softened slightly. My grandmother. She believed that young women should be able to protect themselves in a dangerous world. She taught me that survival sometimes requires violence, but that violence should never be the first choice. Victoria Sterling, for the first time in her life, found herself completely outmaneuvered. She had expected tears, pleading, submission. Instead, she had discovered that the quiet girl from the art studio was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. What happens now? She asked, her voice small and uncertain. Maya looked at each of them in turn, her gaze steady and calculating. Now you leave me alone. You find someone else to entertain yourselves with. You stop taking photos of me, stop stealing my supplies, stop making my life miserable for your own amusement. Sophie retrieved her phone from the floor, checking it for damage. And if we don't? She asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. Maya's smile was cold as winter. Then you'll discover that what happened here today was me being gentle. My grandmother taught me techniques that would put you in the hospital for weeks, and she taught me how to make it look like an accident. Emma cradled her injured wrist against her chest. You're threatening us, she said. But there was no conviction in her voice. I'm establishing boundaries, Maya corrected. I'm making it clear that I won't be anyone's victim, and that there are consequences for trying to hurt me. You came here with scissors, planning to cut me, and you're leaving with bruises and a better understanding of who you're dealing with. Victoria looked around the art studio, taking in the overturned easels, the scattered supplies, the evidence of violence that had erupted in what should have been a peaceful space. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Obsession with your little hobby. Maya set down her charcoal and turned slowly to face her tormentors. Victoria stood directly behind her chair, close enough that Maya could smell her expensive perfume mixed with something sharper, something that suggested adrenaline and anticipation. Sophie had positioned herself near the door, effectively blocking the primary exit route. Emma was examining the art supplies on a nearby table, her fingers trailing over various tools with obvious intent. I'm just trying to finish my assignment, Maya said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to flood her system. Mrs. Patterson said we could use the studio after hours if we needed extra time. Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. Oh, we know. We asked her about the policy specifically. She's so trusting, isn't she? So willing to believe that all her students have pure intentions. She actually thanked us for taking such an interest in the arts program. Sophie Chen laughed, a sound like breaking glass. She said it was wonderful to see school leaders supporting creative expression. If only she knew what kind of expression we had in mind. Emma Rodriguez picked up a pair of heavy-duty scissors from the supply table, the kind used for cutting canvas and thick materials. She tested their weight and balance, opening and closing them with deliberate precision. These are really sharp, she said, her voice carrying a note of appreciation. Professional grade. Someone could really hurt themselves with these if they weren't careful. Maya's training kicked in automatically, her breathing deepening and her posture shifting almost imperceptibly. Her grandmother's lessons flooded her mind. Assess the threat, identify escape routes, calculate the probability of successful nonviolent resolution. What she saw made her heart race with something that wasn't quite fear, but wasn't quite excitement either. Victoria had chosen this moment carefully. The art studio was isolated, with Mrs. Patterson gone for the day and the rest of the school nearly empty. The building's security system wouldn't activate for another hour, and the cleaning crew wouldn't arrive until much later. Victoria Sterling had created the perfect environment for whatever she had planned, a space where she could operate without witnesses or interruption. You know, Maya, Victoria said, her voice conversational despite the menace in her eyes, I've been thinking. About our relationship. About how you've chosen to handle my generous offers of friendship and guidance. About how you've consistently shown disrespect for the social order that keeps this school functioning. Maya remained silent, her eyes tracking the positions of all three girls while her mind calculated distances and angles. Emma with the scissors was the most immediate threat, but Sophie near the door could prevent escape, and Victoria was close enough to grab her if she tried to run. The tactical situation was poor, but not impossible. I think you've forgotten your place, Victoria continued, beginning to circle Maya's chair like a predator stalking prey. I think you've gotten comfortable in your little corner of the world. Forgotten that you're here on sufferance. And I think it's time for a reminder about how things really work. Emma stepped closer, the scissors glinting in her hand. The blades were nearly 6 inches long, sharp enough to cut through heavy fabric or thin metal. In the right hands, they could be lethal. Maybe we should give her a new look, she suggested, her voice carrying a note of anticipation. Something that reflects her actual status here. Sophie's phone was out, ready to record whatever happened next. This is going to be so good, she said, her voice breathless with excitement. Finally, some real entertainment. Finally, something worth posting. Victoria's hand fell on Maya's shoulder, her fingers digging in with enough force to leave bruises. Her grip was surprisingly strong, suggesting that her privileged lifestyle hadn't made her entirely soft. Here's what's going to happen, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. You're going to sit very still while Emma teaches you about respect, and then you're going to thank us for the lesson. Maya felt Victoria's grip tighten, felt Emma moving closer with the scissors, felt the weight of their combined attention pressing down on her like a physical force. This was the moment her grandmother had prepared her for, the moment when restraint became impossible and survival required action. I can't let you do that, Maya said quietly, her voice carrying a note that made Victoria's eyes narrow with sudden uncertainty. Emma laughed, raising the scissors toward Maya's face. You can't stop us, little mouse. There's 3 of us and 1 of you. And we have the tools to make sure you remember this lesson for a long time. The scissors came down toward Maya's throat, Emma's intention clear. This wasn't about cutting hair or making a point about social hierarchy. This was about inflicting serious harm, about using a weapon to establish dominance through violence. Emma Rodriguez had crossed the line from harassment to attempted assault with a deadly weapon. That's when Maya moved. Her grandmother's training had taught her that the most effective strikes were the ones that came without warning, and Emma never saw the hand that caught her wrist and twisted it with surgical precision. The scissors clattered to the floor as Emma's grip was broken by pressure applied to specific nerve points, techniques that Maya's grandmother had taught her while they arranged flowers and discussed the delicate balance between beauty and brutality. Victoria's grip on Maya's shoulder tightened in shock, but Maya was already spinning out of the chair, her movements fluid and precise. She caught Victoria's wrist and applied a joint lock that would have made her grandmother proud, using just enough pressure to force her to release her grip without breaking bones. Victoria stumbled backward, her eyes wide with disbelief at the sudden reversal of the power dynamic. Sophie fumbled with her phone, trying to call for help or at least continue recording, but Maya was already moving toward her. But I'm managing fine on my own. Victoria's expression didn't change, but Maya caught the flash of irritation in her eyes. Victoria Sterling was not accustomed to having her offers of patronage declined, especially not by someone so obviously vulnerable and isolated. Are you sure? Victoria asked, her voice still warm, but with an edge that hadn't been there before. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you could use all the help you can get. The threat was implicit but unmistakable. Maya had just declined Victoria's offer of protection, which meant she had chosen to be an enemy rather than an ally. In Victoria's world, there were no neutral parties, no Switzerland in the social warfare that defined life at Westfield Academy. Maya met Victoria's gaze steadily, her training allowing her to project calm confidence, even as her mind calculated threat levels and response options. "I'm sure," she said quietly, "but thank you for the offer." Victoria's smile was cold as winter. "Well then," she said, her voice carrying a finality that made every student in the studio hold their breath. "I suppose we'll see how well you manage on your own." The harassment escalated over the following weeks with surgical precision. Victoria Sterling had turned Maya's humiliation into a carefully orchestrated campaign designed not just to break her spirit, but to establish absolute dominance over every space Maya tried to claim as her own. What had begun as casual cruelty had evolved into something far more sinister, a systematic destruction of Maya's carefully constructed sanctuary at Westfield Academy. It started with psychological warfare that would have impressed military strategists. Victoria's crew began timing their arrivals to coincide with Maya's most vulnerable moments. They would appear just as Maya was settling into her work, disrupting her concentration with loud conversations about recent parties, expensive vacations, and social events to which Maya would never be invited. The message was clear. Maya existed in a different world, one where she would always be an outsider looking in. Chen had weaponized social media with devastating effectiveness. She created what she called documentary projects about the various subcultures at Westfield Academy, with particular focus on what she termed scholarship students and their creative expressions. Her posts were carefully crafted to appear educational and inclusive while actually highlighting the economic disparities between students. Photos of Maya's corner workspace, her modest supplies, and her secondhand clothes were shared with captions that praised her determination to succeed despite obvious limitations. The comments on these posts were brutal. Students Maya had never met felt comfortable making judgments about her family's financial situation, her social status, and her worthiness to attend Westfield Academy. Sophie had created a digital mob, turning Maya's existence into entertainment for hundreds of followers, who saw her as nothing more than a character in Victoria's social media narrative. Emma Rodriguez's contribution to the campaign was more physical. She had perfected the art of intimidation through presence, positioning herself in Maya's peripheral vision during classes, following her through hallways just close enough to make her uncomfortable, and timing her arrivals at the art studio to coincide with Maya's most focused moments. Emma's background in lacrosse had given her an understanding of tactical movement and spatial awareness that she used to create constant low-level stress for her target. Maya's supplies continued to disappear with increasing frequency. Expensive charcoal pencils would vanish from her case, only to reappear broken in trash cans throughout the school. Her erasers would be found in bathroom sinks, dissolved by whatever chemicals Sophie had access to through her father's pharmaceutical connections. Entire sketchbooks would disappear, only to surface days later with pages torn out or defaced, with subtle markings that destroyed hours of careful work. The other students in the art studio watched Maya's persecution with growing discomfort, but none were willing to risk Victoria's attention by intervening. They had seen what happened to students who challenged the established hierarchy, and self-preservation trumped solidarity. Maya understood their silence, even as it reinforced her isolation. Her grandmother had taught her that bystanders were just another element of the battlefield, neither ally nor enemy, but something to be calculated into every strategic decision. Mrs. Patterson remained oblivious to the systematic campaign being waged in her classroom. She attributed Maya's declining work quality to adjustment difficulties and offered gentle encouragement that only served to highlight Maya's vulnerability. When Maya's usually precise technique became hurried and defensive, Mrs. Patterson suggested she might benefit from working with other students, unknowingly pushing her toward the very people who were tormenting her. The psychological pressure was constant and unrelenting. Victoria had created an environment where Maya could never truly relax, never feel safe, never forget that she was being watched and evaluated and found wanting. It was a masterclass in social torture, designed to break down Maya's defenses without ever crossing lines that would attract administrative attention. Maya's response was to retreat further into herself, to become even more invisible than she had been before. She arrived at classes at the last possible moment and left immediately when they ended. She ate lunch alone in unused classrooms, avoiding the cafeteria where Victoria's crew held court. She developed alternate routes through the school that minimized her exposure to high-traffic areas where confrontations were more likely to occur. But Victoria Sterling was not content with Maya's withdrawal. She wanted complete capitulation, total acknowledgement of her superiority and Maya's worthlessness. Maya's refusal to break down publicly, to cry or beg or provide the dramatic entertainment Victoria craved, only intensified the campaign against her. Victoria began to escalate, pushing boundaries and testing limits with the calculating precision of someone who understood exactly how far she could go without facing consequences. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon in late October, when the autumn light was fading early and most students had already left for their weekend activities. Maya had stayed after school to work on a major project, a self-portrait that required careful attention to detail and the kind of sustained concentration that was impossible during regular class periods. The art studio was nearly empty, with only a few dedicated students remaining to take advantage of the extended hours. Maya was alone in the drawing studio, completely absorbed in capturing the subtle interplay of light and shadow across her own features. She had been working for nearly 2 hours, losing herself in the meditative process of creation that had always been her refuge from the chaos of social interaction. The familiar smell of charcoal and paper surrounded her, and for the first time in weeks, she felt something approaching peace. She didn't hear them enter. Victoria Sterling had perfected the art of moving silently when she wanted to, and Sophie and Emma had learned to match her stealth. Maya's first indication that she was no longer alone came when she felt someone's presence behind her, that instinctive awareness that comes from being watched by hostile eyes. "Working late again, Maya?" Victoria's voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried an undertone that made Maya's blood run cold. Such dedication, such learning. How thoughtful of you. But we're not here to take your space, Maya. We're here to learn more about the artistic community at Westfield Academy. It's important to understand all the different subcultures that exist within our school. The way she said subcultures made it clear that she viewed the art students as something quaint and slightly amusing, like exotic animals in a zoo. Maya could see the other students in the studio shifting uncomfortably, recognizing the implicit threat in Victoria's words. Everyone understood that when Victoria Sterling took an interest in something, it rarely ended well for the object of her attention. Sophie Chen had moved to examine Maya's corner table, her phone capturing every detail of the workspace. "These are interesting supplies," she said, picking up one of Maya's charcoal sticks with exaggerated care. "Professional grade. Someone takes their art very seriously." Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Those charcoal sticks had been a gift from her grandmother, part of a set that had cost more than most students' monthly allowances. But admitting their value would only provide Victoria with more ammunition, more ways to establish Maya's difference from the other students. "I like to have good materials to work with," Maya said carefully. "It makes a difference in the final result." Emma Rodriguez picked up Maya's sketchbook, flipping through pages with casual disregard for the privacy of the artwork inside. "These are really good," she said, her voice carrying a note of genuine surprise. "I mean, like, really good. Did you take classes somewhere?" Maya's grandmother had taught her that information was power and that giving away information unnecessarily was a form of weakness. But she also knew that refusing to answer would be seen as defiance. and defiance would escalate the situation beyond what she was prepared to handle. "I've been drawing since I was little," she said, keeping her response vague and non-committal. "My grandmother encouraged it." Victoria's eyes sharpened with interest. "Your grandmother? How sweet. Is she an artist too?" The question seemed innocent enough, but Maya could hear the calculation beneath it. Victoria was gathering information, building a profile that could be used for future harassment. Every detail Maya revealed would become a potential weapon in Victoria's arsenal. "She appreciates art," Maya said, her voice carefully neutral. "She taught me to see beauty in everyday things." Chen looked up from her phone, where she had been scrolling through the photos she'd taken. "That's so touching. A family. Tradition. I bet she's very proud of your work." The comment was delivered with perfect sincerity, but Maya could hear the underlying mockery. Victoria's crew was skilled at this kind of psychological warfare, able to deliver insults that sounded like compliments and establish dominance through seemingly innocent conversation. Maya's training had prepared her for physical confrontation, but her grandmother had also taught her about psychological warfare, about the ways that words could be used as weapons and information could be turned against you. She recognized what was happening here, understood that Victoria was establishing her authority not just over Maya, but over the entire art studio community. "She is," Maya said simply, refusing to provide any additional information that could be weaponized. Victoria moved closer, her expensive perfume cutting through the familiar smells of paint and turpentine. "You know, Maya, I've been thinking about our conversation in the hallway. I realized that I was, perhaps, a bit harsh. You're new here, and you're still learning how things work at Westfield Academy." Maya's training screamed warnings at her. This was the moment when predators often appeared most reasonable, when they offered false friendship or fake reconciliation as a way to lower their target's defenses. Victoria Sterling was far too intelligent to rely solely on crude intimidation, when subtlety could be more effective. "I appreciate that," Maya said, her voice carefully modulated to show gratitude without appearing weak. "I'm still adjusting to everything here." Emma Rodriguez set down Maya's sketchbook, but not before tearing one of the pages slightly. It was a small gesture, probably unnoticeable to anyone not paying attention, but Maya saw it clearly. The "do" message was unmistakable. Victoria's crew could damage anything of Maya's, anytime they chose, and there was nothing she could do about it. "Adjustment can be difficult," Victoria continued, her voice warm with false sympathy, "especially when you're trying to find your place in an established community. But I think we can help with that. Sophie, Emma, and I have been talking, and we think you might benefit from our guidance." Chen looked up from her phone with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We could show you the ropes, help you understand the social dynamics here. It would be like having big sisters looking out for you." Maya's grandmother had taught her that the most dangerous enemies were the ones who claimed to be helping you. Victoria Sterling was offering protection, but Maya understood that it was protection from threats that Victoria herself would create. It was a classic manipulation tactic, creating a problem and then offering to solve it in exchange for submission and loyalty. "That's very kind of you," Maya said, her voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in her head. This was someone who enjoyed having power over others, who found satisfaction in making people smaller than themselves. "I understand," Maya said, her voice carrying just enough deference to satisfy Victoria's ego without completely debasing herself. "I'll be more careful in the future." Victoria's two companions had materialized during the confrontation, flanking her like well-dressed bodyguards. Chen stood to Victoria's right, her phone already out and recording, capturing every moment of Maya's humiliation for posterity. Emma Rodriguez positioned herself to Victoria's left, her athletic build and aggressive posture making it clear that she was ready to escalate things if Victoria decided that words weren't sufficient. "What's your name?" Victoria asked, and Maya realized this was another test. Refusing to answer would be seen as defiance, but giving her name would make her a target for future harassment. She calculated her options quickly, weighing the immediate consequences against the long-term implications. "Maya," she said finally, omitting her last name in the hope that it might provide some small protection. Victoria's smile widened, and Maya knew she had made a mistake. "Maya," Victoria repeated, testing the name on her tongue like she was savoring it. "Well, Maya, I hope you've learned something valuable today about paying attention to your surroundings. Westfield Academy has certain standards, and we expect all our students to meet them." The dismissal was clear, but Maya remained crouched on the floor, still gathering her scattered supplies. Her hands moved efficiently, collecting charcoal sticks and pencils while her mind processed the encounter from every angle. Victoria Sterling had just marked her as a target, had made it clear that Maya's presence was unwelcome and her status was negligible. This was exactly the kind of attention Maya had spent her entire academic career avoiding. Sophie Chen stepped forward, her phone still recording. "Are you going to sit there all day?" she asked, her voice carrying the same casual cruelty that seemed to come naturally to Victoria's inner circle. "Some of us have places to be." Maya stood slowly, her movements careful and controlled. She had managed to collect most of her supplies, though she could see several pieces of charcoal that had rolled under the display case and would have to be abandoned. Her sketchbook was intact, though several pages were now wrinkled and would need to be carefully smoothed out later. "Thank you for your patience," Maya said, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "I'll get out of your way now." Victoria studied her with obvious satisfaction, enjoying the power dynamic that had been established. "See that you do," she said. "And Maya, next time you're running late, maybe you should leave earlier instead of rushing through the hallways like a tornado." Emma Rodriguez laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the hallway. "Maybe she should take the service corridors," she suggested. "Leave the main hallways for people who know how to use them properly." Maya felt her grandmother's training warring with her natural instincts. Every muscle in her body was coiled and ready, her mind automatically calculating angles and vulnerabilities, escape routes and pressure points. Victoria Sterling was standing just close enough that Maya could have ended this confrontation in seconds, could have demonstrated exactly why underestimating quiet people was a dangerous mistake. Her green eyes were cold as winter ice, and her expression suggested that Maya had just committed an unforgivable social transgression. The hallway around them had gone completely silent. Students who had been rushing to class just moments before now stood frozen, watching the scene unfold with the kind of fascination usually reserved for car accidents or natural disasters. Maya could feel their eyes on her, could sense the collective held breath as everyone waited to see how Victoria Sterling would respond to being inconvenienced by someone so far beneath her social status. Victoria's voice, when she finally spoke, was perfectly controlled and absolutely lethal. "Are you completely incapable of watching where you're going?" she asked, her tone suggesting that Maya's existence was a personal affront to her sensibilities. "Or are you just naturally clumsy?" Maya's training kicked in automatically, her grandmother's lessons about de-escalation and tactical retreat flooding her mind. She kept her eyes downcast, her voice soft and apologetic, every gesture designed to minimize threat and deflect aggression. "I'm so sorry," she said, her words barely above a whisper. "I was running late and I wasn't paying attention. I didn't mean to bump into you." Victoria examined her pristine blazer with theatrical concern, brushing at invisible dust and checking for any signs of damage. "This jacket costs more than most people's rent," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hallway. "If you've damaged it, you'll be replacing it." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her expression neutral, her body language submissive. "I don't think there's any damage," she said carefully. "But if there is, I'll absolutely take responsibility for it. Victoria's eyes narrowed as she studied Maya more closely, taking in the discount store clothes, the generic sneakers, the careful way Maya held herself as if trying to take up as little space as possible. I don't think I know you, she said, her tone making it clear that this was not an oversight on her part, but a deliberate assessment of Maya's worth. Are you new? The question hung in the air like a blade. Maya could feel the weight of every gaze in the hallway, could sense the way the other students were cataloging every detail of this encounter for future reference. She knew that her response would determine not just how this confrontation ended, but how the rest of her time at Westfield Academy would unfold. Yes, Maya replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. I started a few weeks ago. Victoria's smile was sharp as a scalpel. Well then, let me give you some friendly advice about how things work at Westfield Academy, she said, stepping closer until Maya could smell her expensive perfume. The hallways here have a certain flow, a certain order. People like you should learn to navigate them without disturbing people like me. Maya's grandmother had taught her to read micro-expressions, to detect the subtle signs that indicated when someone was about to escalate from verbal to physical aggression. Victoria Sterling was still in the verbal intimidation phase, but Maya could see the calculation in her eyes, the way she was testing boundaries and measuring responses. Not belonging in the sense of being accepted by a social group, but belonging in the sense of having found a place where her skills were valued and her presence was welcome. She started staying after school to work on personal projects, using the studio's equipment to explore techniques that required more advanced materials than she could afford on her own. Mrs. Patterson seemed pleased to have a student who was so dedicated to her craft, and she began offering Maya additional instruction and access to specialized equipment. Maya's academic performance in her other classes was solid but unremarkable, exactly as she intended. She completed assignments competently, participated just enough to avoid unwanted attention from teachers, and maintained the careful balance between success and invisibility that had served her throughout her educational career. Her teachers saw her as a reliable student who would probably do well in college, but wasn't particularly memorable. Her classmates barely registered her existence, which was exactly how she wanted it. The peaceful routine Maya had established felt sustainable, almost comfortable. She was beginning to think that she might actually be able to finish her time at Westfield Academy without incident, that she had successfully navigated the social minefield and found her safe harbor in the art studios. She was beginning to believe that she could remain invisible until graduation, that her grandmother's training would remain a secret she never needed to use. But Maya had underestimated the reach of Victoria Sterling's influence and the way power dynamics could shift without warning. She had assumed that staying in the art wing would protect her from the social hierarchies that dominated the rest of the school, but she was about to learn that neutrality was not the same as safety, and that sometimes the most dangerous predators were the ones who hunted for sport rather than survival. Maya's carefully constructed invisibility shattered on a Tuesday morning in late September, when she made the mistake of taking a shortcut through the main building. She had been running late after staying up until nearly midnight working on a self-portrait assignment, and the direct route to the central hallway seemed like her best option for reaching her first period chemistry class on time. It was a decision that would prove to be a catastrophic error in judgment. The collision happened just outside the library, where the hallway narrowed slightly to accommodate a display case filled with academic trophies and awards. Maya was moving quickly, her backpack bouncing against her hip as she navigated around a cluster of students who were taking their time getting to class. She had her head down, focused on the floor tiles as she always did when moving through crowded spaces, when she rounded the corner and walked directly into someone coming from the opposite direction. The impact sent both girls stumbling, and Maya's sketchbook went flying, pages fluttering through the air like fallen leaves. Her pencil case hit the floor with a sharp crack, spilling charcoal sticks and erasers across the polished tiles. Maya immediately dropped to her knees, apologizing profusely while trying to gather her scattered supplies, her face burning with embarrassment at having drawn such obvious attention to herself. It wasn't until she looked up to continue her apology that she realized exactly who she had collided with. Victoria Sterling stood above her, impeccably dressed in a designer blazer that probably cost more than Maya's entire wardrobe, her platinum hair still perfectly styled despite the collision. The message was clear to anyone watching. This was her domain, and everyone else existed within it at her pleasure. After the crowd dispersed and the hallway returned to normal, Maya made it her business to learn more about the social structure she had unwittingly entered. She discovered that Westfield Academy operated on a very specific hierarchy, with family wealth and social connections determining status more than academic achievement or personal merit. Victoria Sterling sat at the top of this pyramid, not just because her family owned half the real estate in the city, but because she had the intelligence and ruthlessness to maintain her position through careful manipulation and strategic cruelty. Victoria's inner circle consisted of two other girls who seemed to exist primarily to amplify her power. Chen was her lieutenant, a sharp-featured girl with perfectly styled auburn hair, who specialized in gathering information and spreading rumors with surgical precision. Despite sharing a surname with Maya, Sophie came from a completely different world, her family having made their fortune in tech investments and social media ventures. She had the kind of beauty that looked effortless but required significant time and money to maintain, and she wielded social media like a weapon, capable of destroying reputations with a single well-placed post. The third member of Victoria's trio was Emma Rodriguez, who served as both muscle and entertainment. Emma was shorter than the other two, but built like an athlete, with the kind of presence that made people step aside in hallways. She had been recruited to Westfield on a lacrosse scholarship, but her real value to Victoria was her willingness to handle the more physical aspects of maintaining their social dominance. Emma had a reputation for being unpredictable, for taking things just a little too far, and that reputation was carefully cultivated to keep potential challengers in line. Maya watched this trio operate with the same analytical attention she brought to her art. She noticed how they moved through the hallways, how other students adjusted their behavior when they approached, how teachers seemed to give them special consideration that had nothing to do with their academic performance. Victoria, Sophie, and Emma had created a system of control that was far more sophisticated than simple bullying. They maintained their power through information, reputation, and the ever-present threat of social destruction. The art wing, Maya discovered, was generally considered neutral territory. Victoria and her friends had little interest in the creative arts, viewing them as beneath their attention unless they needed to fulfill some requirement for college applications. This meant that the art studios were populated primarily by students who existed on the periphery of the social hierarchy, the genuinely talented artists who were too focused on their work to care about status games, the quiet kids who used art as an escape, and the occasional student who was hiding from something or someone. Mrs. Patterson ran her domain with a gentle but firm hand, making it clear that the art studios were safe spaces where students could focus on their creative work, without worrying about the social dynamics that dominated the rest of the school. She had been teaching at Westfield for nearly 20 years, and she had seen enough bright students crushed by the social pressure to recognize when someone needed protection. Maya sensed that Mrs. Patterson had identified her as one of those students, though she couldn't have known the real reason Maya needed to remain invisible. The art studios themselves were beautiful spaces, with high ceilings and large windows that let in natural light throughout the day. Each studio was equipped with professional-grade supplies and equipment, from easels and pottery wheels to darkroom facilities for photography students. Maya's favorite was the drawing studio, where she could work with charcoal and pastels while surrounded by the quiet concentration of other students focused on their own projects. The smell of fixative and paper, the soft scratch of pencils, and the gentle conversation of students discussing technique created an atmosphere that felt more like a sanctuary than a classroom. Maya established her routine quickly. She would arrive at the drawing studio during lunch period, claim her corner table near the windows, and lose herself in whatever project she was working on. She brought her own supplies from home, professional grade charcoals and papers that her grandmother had taught her to appreciate. Her work was sophisticated for someone her age, showing an understanding of light and shadow, form and composition that impressed even Mrs. Patterson. But Maya was careful not to let her skill draw too much attention, keeping her most advanced techniques hidden and presenting herself as merely talented rather than exceptional. The other students in the art studios accepted her presence with the casual indifference that characterized most artistic communities. They were too focused on their own work to pay much attention to the quiet girl in the corner, and Maya preferred it that way. She exchanged polite greetings with her classmates, occasionally offered help with technique when asked, but otherwise maintained the low profile that had served her well throughout her academic career. Maya's grandmother had taught her that information was power, and she used her position in the art studios to gather intelligence about her new environment. She learned which students were genuinely kind and which ones were simply skilled at appearing so. She identified the teachers who could be trusted and the ones who played favorites. She mapped the social connections that determined everything, from seating arrangements at lunch to partner assignments and group projects. Most importantly, she learned to recognize the signs of potential trouble before it arrived. The art studios had their own rhythm, their own culture that existed somewhat independently of the larger school hierarchy. Students here were judged more on their talent and dedication than their family connections or social media presence. It was a meritocracy of sorts, though even here, family wealth could buy better supplies, private lessons, and opportunities that weren't available to everyone. Maya appreciated this environment because it was the closest thing to fairness she had found at Westfield Academy. As weeks passed, Maya began to feel something she hadn't experienced in years, the possibility of belonging somewhere. The scissors gleamed under the fluorescent lights as three bullies cornered the quiet art student in the empty classroom. They thought they had found the perfect victim. Someone small, defenseless, alone. What they didn't know was that Chen had been trained since childhood by her grandmother, a former intelligence operative who had taught her that the most dangerous weapon is the one nobody sees coming. When those scissors came toward her throat, years of lethal training kicked in, and three bullies learned why you should never underestimate the girl who sits alone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Chen had always been the type of person who could disappear in a crowded room. At 16, she stood barely 5 feet tall with delicate features that made her look even younger than her years. Her straight black hair was always pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she had a habit of tucking herself into oversized sweaters that seemed to swallow her whole frame. She wore wire-rimmed glasses that she constantly pushed up her nose when she was nervous, which was most of the time. Maya had the kind of presence that made teachers forget to call on her and classmates forget she existed at all. When her family moved to Westfield Academy in the middle of her sophomore year, Maya figured she would do what she always did: find a corner, keep to herself, and wait for the school year to end. Her father's job as a diplomatic attaché meant constant relocations, and Maya had learned not to form attachments to places or people. It was easier that way, safer to remain a ghost drifting through the hallways of yet another unfamiliar school. Westfield Academy was one of those prestigious private institutions, with ivy-covered brick buildings and manicured lawns that whispered old money and high expectations. The hallways were lined with portraits of distinguished alumni, and every surface gleamed with the kind of polish that only came from generous endowments and careful maintenance. The students moved through these hallways with the confidence that came from knowing they belonged, that their families had paid for their place in this world. Maya's refuge became the art wing, a series of studios and classrooms tucked away in the East Building, where the light was best and the atmosphere was slightly more relaxed than the rest of the school. She had always been drawn to visual arts, finding solace in the quiet concentration required for drawing and painting. There was something peaceful about losing herself in the careful application of charcoal to paper, or the way watercolors bled into each other on canvas. In the art room, she could be invisible by choice rather than circumstance. The art teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was a kind woman in her 50s who wore flowing scarves and had paint permanently embedded under her fingernails. She seemed to understand that some students needed art, not just as a class, but as a sanctuary. And she made sure the studios were always open during lunch periods and after school. Maya quickly claimed a corner table near the back windows where she could work undisturbed, surrounded by the familiar smell of turpentine and the soft scratch of pencils on paper. For the first few weeks at Westfield, Maya's strategy worked perfectly. She attended her classes, completed her assignments, and spent her free time in the art studios where she could practice her techniques and work on personal projects. Her teachers were impressed with her work, though they wished she would participate more in class discussions. Her classmates barely noticed her existence, which was exactly how she preferred it. Maya's grandmother had always told her that the best way to survive in any situation was to observe first and act second. Nai had been full of wisdom like that, practical advice delivered in her careful English while she taught Maya to arrange flowers or prepare tea. What Maya's classmates didn't know, what nobody at Westfield Academy knew, was that her grandmother's wisdom came from a very different kind of education than most people would expect from an elderly Chinese woman who spent her days tending to her garden and teaching her granddaughter traditional arts. Lin Wei had been one of the most effective intelligence operatives of her generation, though her work had been so classified that even now, decades later, Maya only knew fragments of the truth. She knew that her grandmother had worked for agencies that didn't officially exist, that she had been trained in ways of gathering information and eliminating threats that most people only saw in movies. She knew that the careful, precise movements her grandmother had taught her while showing her how to arrange ikebana or practice calligraphy were actually deadly techniques disguised as cultural traditions. Every summer since she was 7 years old, Maya had spent her days with Nai, learning what she thought were traditional arts and family customs. She learned to move with perfect balance and control, to read micro-expressions and body language, to remain perfectly still for hours at a time. Her grandmother taught her that patience was the greatest weapon, that the person who could wait the longest and strike at the perfect moment would always win. These lessons had been woven so seamlessly into cultural education that Maya herself hadn't realized their true nature until much later. The training had been disguised as everything else. Meditation exercises that taught her to control her breathing and heart rate under stress. Dance lessons that were actually combat forms. Cooking classes that included the careful handling of very sharp knives and the precise knowledge of anatomy required to butcher meat efficiently. Her grandmother had been preparing her for a world that Maya hoped she would never need to enter. But the old woman had lived through enough history to know that hope was not a strategy. At Westfield Academy, Maya appeared to be nothing more than a quiet, artistic girl who preferred books to parties and solitude to socializing. She sat in the back of classrooms, ate lunch alone, and spent her afternoons in the art studios working on projects that showcased considerable talent, but no dangerous knowledge. Her teachers saw a dedicated student who needed encouragement to participate more. Her classmates saw nothing at all, which was exactly what Maya intended. The irony was not lost on her that she had become invisible through her own skill rather than circumstances. Every movement, every gesture, every carefully chosen piece of clothing was designed to make her unremarkable. She had learned to modulate her voice so that it carried no authority, to arrange her features so that they conveyed no threat, to position her body so that it suggested vulnerability rather than capability. It was a performance as precise as any her grandmother had ever executed, and it was perfectly effective. Maya told herself that this was temporary, that she just needed to get through her remaining years of high school before she could decide what kind of person she wanted to be. Her grandmother had always said that the greatest strength was the ability to choose when to be weak, and Maya had chosen to be weak until she no longer needed to be. She had no interest in proving herself to anyone, no desire to stand out or be noticed. She simply wanted to survive adolescence and emerge on the other side with her secrets intact. But invisibility, Maya would soon learn, was not always a protection. Sometimes it made you a target for exactly the kind of people who enjoyed hurting those who seemed unable to fight back. Maya's first real glimpse into Westfield Academy's social ecosystem came during her third week, when she witnessed what the students called the hierarchy in action. She was sitting in her usual corner of the art studio during lunch, working on a charcoal portrait, when she heard raised voices coming from the main hallway. Through the studio's glass walls, she could see a crowd gathering around what appeared to be some kind of confrontation. The center of attention was a girl about Maya's age, but there the similarities ended. Victoria Sterling stood nearly 6 feet tall in her designer heels, with platinum blonde hair that looked like it required professional maintenance and clothes that probably cost more than most families' monthly rent. She carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no, never having faced a consequence she couldn't buy her way out of. Her voice cut through the hallway noise like a blade, sharp and precise and utterly without mercy. The target of Victoria's attention was a younger student, probably a freshman, who was pressed against the lockers looking like she wanted to disappear into the metal. Maya couldn't hear the specific words, but she could read the body language perfectly. Victoria was demonstrating her power, showing everyone within sight that she could destroy someone's social standing with nothing more than her voice and her reputation. The other students formed a circle around the confrontation, some watching with obvious entertainment, others looking uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Maya's grandmother had taught her that every environment had its predators and its prey, and the key to survival was understanding which category you fell into and acting accordingly. At Westfield Academy, Victoria Sterling was clearly the apex predator, and she had just marked her territory in the most public way possible.